Hawke's Bay Regional Council meeting, 31st of May. Could I please ask Councillor Hawke to open our meeting for today? Kia ora.
Ka te ake rā e te puinga wha hau mai tawhiti, hau mai tata, me kāroko tai kia tutuki pai ai ngā whainga kei mui a tātou, mā te kare ki a tātou e kauea i tō tātene hui i tēnei ahi ahi. Me timatai tātou ki tēnei o ngā karakia, whakataka te hau ki te uru.
Whakataka te hau ki te tonga, kia mā kina ki uta, kia mā taratara ki tai. E hea kia te ata kura, he tio, he huka, he hauhu, ti hei, mauri ora.
Mauri ora kia tātou.
Mauri ora kia koe, Thompson. Tēnā koutou katoa. Just welcoming everyone to today's meeting. Do we have any apologies for today's meeting? There
I
are
have
none.
not received any.
Fantastic. Are there any notices for today? There are none. Any conflict of interest declarations? There are none. Confirmation of minutes from the last council meeting on the 26th of April. Are there any amendments to be made? There are none. Can I please have a mover and a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Sears. Councillor Williams, second. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Call for minor items. There are none. We head into decision items. Report and recommendations from the Māori Committee. Can I please invite Mr. Paku as the Chair of the Māori Committee? Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Look, this was the first time the Māori Committee had actually come together as part of our tour. We set our various committee members, appointed our chairs and so forth. We did have to have a compressed meeting due to the fact that we had a significant tangi within our Ahuriri community that our whānau wanted to attend. So we had a compressed time frame. As you can all imagine, the cyclone recovery was central on everybody's minds. What did come out of that was we felt there was a need for us to workshop not only with ourselves as the Māori Standing Committee, but also perhaps with the Regional Planning Committee, with our, I think that's Tomiko coming back. No, we're all good. Particularly with regards to our PSGs and just helping getting ourselves all on the same page, that we're not tripping over each other, given the fact that we all stem from the same marae, same hapu, same iwi. So making sure that we're all on the same page and acting in a collaborative fashion. The other point of interest, and that has been covered off in a further item I see later on in the meeting, was in regards to representation around the Cyclone Recovery Committee. And I'll leave it at there, Madam Chair. Any questions?
Thank you, Mr. Paku.
Thank you.
Any questions? There are none. The recommendations note that we receive the report and that also the nominations from the Māori Committee of Roger Marker and Paul Kelly onto the Climate Action Joint Committee and Katarina Kawana and Peter Eden as the members for the Cyclone Recovery Committee. Thank you very much.
I do note for the Environmental Committee that we also have Mara Apatu as the alternate.
Thank you. Noted. Could I please have a mover and a seconder to receive that item? Thank you, Councillor Hawke and Councillor Harding. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you. Item 6, report and recommendations from Risk and Audit Subcommittee. As the Chair, Councillor Curtin, would you like to provide a brief summary?
Thank you, Madam Chair. The Risk and Audit Committee held its first meeting for the current traineum, you'll see a paper there which captures the deliberations. that meeting was put off from a pre-cyclone timetable, and post-cyclone activity obviously is drastically different from what it looked like prior to that. So the report and recommendations from the Risk and Audit Committee look substantially different now than they would have a few months ago. Can I highlight for Council perhaps starting at agenda item 7, where the enterprise risk report identified very high levels, probably the highest levels of risk for the organisation for some time, probably decades, and those in particular relate to the cyclone event, substantially involving the financial consequences of that, not only that, the damage, etc., to our infrastructure right across the board. We expect those risks to have diminished over time as we're working away in our recovery planning. One of the things that we recognise in terms of the risk framework that we've had and operated for a number of years is that it doesn't entirely capture all the risks to our organisation, and just like the cyclone, has the effect of flushing those out. One of the things that we've asked staff to consider is the shifting the profile to public safety risks and to putting those up front and centre of any risk framework. So that's a work on that the Risk and Audit Committee have asked to have considered. Turning to paragraph 9 of the paper, you'll see there in the internal assurance corrective actions update, we've asked staff to come back to us with a much more deliberative approach to project completion and making sure that the work that we're undertaking at various levels is dealt with appropriately, and if it's completed, therefore it's finished off. And a number of those relate to exposures, for example, to cybersecurity, some of our HR risks, which you'll know about, ensuring that the organisation is fraud and corruption free. Those sorts of risks need to be dealt with, and it goes across the organisation. So all of the executive team will be asked specifically to pay attention to any projects that need to be dealt with. Councillors, you'll note the recommendations 1 through 3. Turning to, I think, 3 first, you'll see a schedule of reviews that are to take place. You'll know that on an annual basis we undertake probably 2, possibly even 3 reviews, but you'll see there a total of 8 of reviews that are either underway or about to get underway, and we're asking those reviews in the first instance to be transmitted back through the Risk and Audit Committee for an assessment at that level prior to either making their way to a committee or to Council directly. The other important recommendation to come forward is to be seen in recommendation 2. We're asking that the terms of reference for the Audit and Risk Committee are considered, and one of those key ones, and thank you to Mr. Bayfield for assisting us in this regard and giving us a context for the Risk and Audit Committee in other locations. So we're seeking to appoint an independent person to chair the Risk and Audit Committee. We're noting that the Risk and Audit Committee reports directly to Council, and that the purpose of the committee is to cover those financial and risk and non-financial risks that will be identified in the terms of reference. So a milestone Risk and Audit Committee meeting, and one where we're now asking for some significant steps to be taken prior to the next iteration of this. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Curtin, and commend you and committee members and staff for bringing about such change and a step change within this subcommittee. Thank you. Susie, would you like to add anything? And would you like to come up just in case there's questions? Yeah, Zen, thank you.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, thank you, Councillor Curtin, for that fulsome and very useful, helpful summary of the paper that we have and the work that was done in the last Risk and Audit Subcommittee. I think I'm confident that the paper captures all the important issues. I did turn my mind to whether the recommendations should include, should capture the point at paragraph 8 around an external review of our risk policy and framework. That is an important piece of work. That's not, I think it's important to distinguish that this is not related to the cyclone. This is just a belts and braces best practice approach to running a risk and audit function, in the same way as having an external chair. So it's not, so this is, just best practice. I think that the idea of the external review is well embedded, so I don't think we need to alter the recommendation, but I just thought it was worth pointing out that that's just part of a general best practice review. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Harding. Bill.
Through you, Madam Chair, thank you for reminding me. Can I note that with Chris and Susie's assistance, we've contacted who might help us with that workshop, and I believe they're coming to visit us next week or the week next week, just to kick that off.
Are there any other questions?
Yeah.
Councillor Williams, thank you.
Thank you. Just for line of sight, and I appreciate that that's part of the purpose of this committee coming a direct report, if you like. Just to understand that there are 9 high-related risks. If I go down the attachment at the end, if I looked at it last year, it would have had 1, whereas now it's got 8 out of about 10 are red rather than yellow or some other colour. What's not evident from the table, I guess, is, although it's pretty obvious for assets and infrastructure, how, for example, people and capability might be at a high risk when previously it was at some other status. So I guess what I'm not getting from that is exactly how the cyclone elevated all of those categories. But am I right in understanding that it was the cyclone that pretty much was the difference? After that's residual risk after mitigation.
Well, most certainly that these have emerged in that quarter, but Ms Young may wish to.
I can help answer that.
you.
So what we saw in the cyclone is a number, obviously, vast impacts. So when we assess risk, we look at financial impact, compliance impact, reputational impact, and people impact. And so what you'll see here is reflective of at some point these risks triggering a high either financial or reputation or compliance or people event. Just that health and safety and well-being, certainly that is reflective of what we're currently seeing in our workforce, just around silt debris, abusive phone calls, etc., and a higher risk to our staff, which we now need to manage as a result of public frustration, anger, etc.
Thank you, Susie. Any other questions?
I'll move the recommendation, Madam Chair.
Thank you. Can I please have a seconder? Councillor Harding, would you like to speak any further? No? All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against? Carried. Thank you, Susie. We move on to item 7, report and recommendations from the Clifton to Tangoil Coastal Hazards Strategy Joint Committee. Councillor Van Beek, thank you. If you could provide a summary from that meeting.
I'll try the best I can. And I'll be quick, knowing that the agenda is quite full. We met, and 2 of the key things that we needed to do was, first of all, agree to the terms of references, which we did, and also appoint 2 new deputies, Councillor Hayley Brown from Napier and Councillor Owen Corbyn. And both of them will be very active members of the committee in their respective roles. Also, we talked about the timing for the strategy notification, which was meant to be August of this year, but due to, and that was already a very tight timeline for us to achieve, and any road bumps would have knocked us off the track, and we didn't have a road bump, but we had a flood, and it definitely did knock us off our tracks. So unfortunately, we had to make some alterations and look at some options on how we now could notify the strategy. And as a joint committee, we came to the point after our staff advised us that a standalone consultation August 2024 would be the best way to go forward. However, with that will come an extra recommendation that we need to include in the long-term plan a line for funding. Otherwise, we may notify a strategy without actually any funding behind it. So that's one of the important parts that we need to do. This is rather unfortunate that we have been delayed. We've got 3 communities on the coast that are really have built up a lot of angst after the cyclone and the enormous amount of inundation, and not just from rainwater but also from sea. That they really would like us as councils and council to get on with this work, but unfortunately we just haven't got time on our side. So we will have to deal with that, and we're working very closely with these communities, and they are very understanding. And that's mainly due to, as a joint committee, we have worked very closely with these communities to work with us and get their advice and input into the strategy, so they understand the issues that we're dealing with.
Thank you, Councillor. Any questions? Councillor Foley.
Thank you, Councillor Van Beek. Just a question on what's actually happening out there, like talking to all the fishermen, they're pretty frustrated because of the easterly weather pattern, which is not normal to go on for so long. But is that in itself causing more issues? You know, you and me were sort of talking to a settlement further south the other day that seems to have just kind of all, you know, had some significant issues in the last year or two. Is that weather pattern having an impact as well?
I'm not sure that has an impact. We definitely, the speed of erosion has increased, and whether it's purely Cyclone Gabrielle or whether it's just a pattern over this particular summer, we're not quite sure of. And as a council, and Chris, maybe you can answer this one, we do actually do, as we do river gaugings, we do the similar measurements on the coast, and you may be able to comment more on that, Chris.
Would you like to come up just for the speaker? Thank you.
I'll keep it brief, but yeah, so Councillor Van Beek's right, we do survey our coastal areas just like we do our rivers. We're very clear on the areas that are in net erosion, and it's a seasonal sort of approach. So some years are worse than others. Sometimes there's erosion, sometimes there's accretion, but there's generally a net erosion in those erosion areas. So yeah, difficult to comment on that specifically on the weather, but certainly we've had 2 cyclones this year, which has exacerbated erosion in this particular calendar year.
Councillor Broadley. I think it was Mike first. Mr. Parker.
Thank you, Councillor Van Beek. I appreciate your words in regards to engaging the community. I think it's very, very important. Also very appreciative of the fact that we are tangata whenua appointments. My only comment here more is that there's some autonomy given to those representatives to actually be able to engage with our Māori community, because we have multiple hapu across that coastline. And for those various entities there, the number of hapu that they interact with, they vary. And so some of those coastal, some of these entities, they have quite large hapu engagement that they'll need to undertake. My thinking is here is let's not get to the end of this process and the grassroots haven't been consulted, and yet we wait till we get into that submission phase, and at that point we try and engage them because it's just too late. We end up in that confrontation. So I'm basically asking here that there's some autonomy given to that group, to that committee. They know their communities better than most, so they'll know who they need to engage with. It's just allowing them to get on and get their job done.
Mr. Dolly, could you respond with the engagement plan going forward?
Yeah, so there's a couple of comments. So I guess we would fully expect that the tangata whenua representatives on that project do talk to their communities and bring those ideas to the table. That's precisely why they are involved, to have that outreach of different ideas. In terms of specific consultation, we have put together a communications plan probably over the last 18 months that specifically targeted mana whenua, and we worked through that. It was challenging because we had COVID, and we have at the committee had a discussion that if we had to grade its success, it was probably less than what we would have wanted to achieve, and the team is certainly back to the drawing board to understand how we can continue to engage those tangata whenua particularly. So it is a focus. We also have a Mātauranga Māori work stream, which would be of great interest, and so we're working through them. It's not easy, but certainly understand we don't want to leave it all to the end. So point taken.
Thank you. I will go to Tanya and then come back to you, Di. Kia ora, Tanya Hopmans.
Kia ora koutou. Just to say, in terms of the committee, and in all the years that I've been attending committee hui and being a member, there has been a good emphasis on trying to engage tangata whenua, and that was through the preliminary process where we had panels in the community which had specific tangata whenua members on it, and also had support for tangata whenua members. So I do feel that throughout the process there has been a real effort to engage, but acknowledging that at times it's just been really challenging to get that feedback from marae, hapu, PSGEs, and perhaps even tai whenua, although I can't speak for tai whenua. But I do acknowledge that there has been efforts, and we keep trying different ways to engage. But I suspect that although coastal hazards is really important, at times it hasn't been the priority for those groups. So yeah, I just wanted to speak on behalf of the governors and definitely TAG, who I acknowledge have made good efforts to reach out. So I don't think it's for want of reaching out. We just need to keep continuing that and trying to find other ways to reach our people. But I think it is more potentially priorities, at that time, whether they've got the time, energy and effort, want to make the effort to engage.
Thank you, Tanya. Thanks for that response. Councillor Rodley.
Thank you, Chair. Through you, I'm not sure if this is a Chris or a Councillor Van Beek question. So I'm new to the strategy, and I commend you on this very important work. I'm just aware that I'm often asked by my constituents why this has the narrow focus from Clifton to Tongoio, and can you give me that in like a couple of bullet points of
Possibly, Chris.
why it's such a focus?
Yeah.
Yep. So two things. One, Clifton to Tongoio has been selected as the original area, in that it's the most populated area in Hawke's Bay, and it had long-standing erosion issues. And there had been frustration within the community of the approach through individual councils. So there was a collective approach. Now, that wasn't done just for Clifton to Tongoio. It was actually done to understand how this approach can be expanded out to the whole region. And we wanted to start with an area that we could understand how we go about it. And we've been going for 10 years, or almost 10 years. So it has been a very long journey. And in fact, but when we started, there wasn't even guidance on how to go about this process. So we've been the first to use the various guidance that has come out of the ministries. And so as part of, I guess, working up to the position where the Hawke's Bay Regional Council would lead this, because that's only been a recent development, we spoke with both Central Hawke's Bay District Council and the Wairoa District Council about opportunities to expand into those areas should they wish. So it's all through a cooperative effort. So that is the intent of the project, but it's been very challenging. And so we want to get a few runs on the board, understand how it's actually going to run, go through the position where the Hawke's Bay Regional Council is formally leading the strategy, and then once we get a few runs on the board, there is that opportunity to expand.
So if I spoke to this with my constituents as almost a pilot prototype of, and it would be expanded as at the right time?
So at the right time, I think we need to go through our notifying the strategy, consulting with the public, understanding how we can fund it. There's some really core questions, and then that's transferable to those other areas. So it's not a next week sort of thing in my view, but we also, councils are actively dealing with coastal issues now, and there is a model for that, but the district councils are a lot more involved, but we're happy to assist as required.
Any other questions for this item? If there are none, would you like to move?
I would like to move.
Thank you very much.
Recommendations 1, 2, 3.
Thank you. And a seconder? Councillor McIntosh, thank you very much. Would you like to speak further?
No, I've said enough.
All those who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Thank you very much. Now we're on to decision item number 8, fixing the common seal. I'm happy to move, and Councillor Foley, you're happy to second. If there are no other comments or questions, all those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. We're on to decision item 16. It was added late to the agenda. The committee membership changes. So Desiree is the lead of this paper. Is Desiree here? No? Okay. So what we'll do is take this as read, but I'd like to invite Councillor Sears as the chair of this of the Cyclone Recovery Committee to briefly speak. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Yes, I am quite happy to, but the beginning of the paper just deals with some movements around the Māori Committee, etc. Yep. Would you like to deal with those first?
I'll deal with those in the recommendations because they're quite simple. Yes.
Yes, so we had our first cyclone recovery meeting last week. Week before, where it was raised the membership from the RPC through Ms. Hopmans. The paper that we had at the recovery meeting was simply an appointment paper. So there was no further room to discuss memberships or terms of reference. And this paper reflects the end of that conversation, and it's come back here for discussion.
Thank you, Councillor Sears. And invite Councillor Hopmans for a brief overview on behalf of the RPC.
I've been promoted to a councillor status. That's exciting.
Well, we're in discussion time. You are the co-chair of the RPC.
Look, I was just trying to find, I had marked up that paper, but it's not in our papers for this meeting. Was it a late paper?
Yeah, it's a late
I think
paper.
it's somewhere separately. Can I just grab that, because then I can direct you to, here it is, late paper, so beg your pardon. Yes, so really the guts of this is that the PSGEs who've had their areas most affected, their marae, their family homes most affected, want to be able to participate in these discussions and be members of this Cyclone Recovery Committee. When it was initially put, it assumed that it would be 2 appointed members from the Regional Planning Committee, as we have with various other committees. when we discussed it as tangata whenua, there was a strong feeling that that wasn't appropriate for this particular committee because of the importance of cyclone recovery to those PSGEs, and wanting to make sure that they all have a voice at the table. So the recommendation that they wanted to put forward was that the 4 most effective PSGEs, so Wairoa, Tātou Tātou, MTT, Mana Ahuriri and Heretaunga Tamatea Settlement Trust, that they are able to nominate their own representatives to this committee. They most likely, and I think some names have been included in the paper, would be the RPC members, but they may not be. However, we do have some names which have been included in the paper. There is one name there, Tanya Eden, and Tanya had told me previously that Mana Ahuriri would like to appoint Peter Eden, who's, I understand, has already been appointed by the Māori committee. So there's a little wrinkle on that. So that would be a change all up from the previous 2 members from the RPC to 4 members from the affected PSGEs. And yeah, I don't think there's really much more to add, except that at the time that the Cyclone Recovery Committee was being discussed, I know I couldn't make that very first hui, and just to say that the Regional Planning Committee tangata whenua members, which are the PSGEs, we had only met once since the cyclone, and that was to respond specifically to a request from MFE to meet. So we hadn't met properly as a group to discuss the Cyclone Recovery Committee, and it wasn't until our meeting just a week ago or a couple of weeks ago that we actually were able to focus on it properly. And apologies that, that wasn't timely, but as everybody knows, everybody's been busy, and at that time in April we were still stretched with response. So I think that's really the main gist of it, and hoping that the councillors can appreciate the request and support the request.
Could I please take any questions? We have Desiree here now on the paper. Questions or comments? Mr. Paku.
Might be timely. So I did say in the Māori Committee report that the question around this was raised, and that I would touch on it at this particular time. So that question also came up at the Māori Standing Committee in regards to representation across the district, especially those areas that had been affected. So representative from Wairoa through to Tamatea at the Māori Standing Committee level. So that would have taken it from 2 to 4. We took the paper as presented. So all I'm saying here is that I suspect that there will be flow-on effects if there was to be a change to the representation model. I would imagine that the members of the Māori Standing Committee would want to review if the terms of reference are to be changed.
Yes.
Kia ora.
And just to add to that, Mr. Paku, that this is a council committee like corporate and strategic, where we call on from both our RPC and our Māori committee for tangata whenua representation, and to highlight also that we have a Kiraki Ki Tonga seat around the table, and Councillor Lambert and Councillor Hokianga. Are there any other questions or comments before we move into the recommendations? Councillor Lambert.
Yeah, tēnā koe anyway. Ka tuakea ki te kōrero i te whakaeti, e hara te whakahihi. So, yeah, I think in terms of my position, I realise I was voted on by mana whenua and tangata whenua. So, I can understand what the Māori Committee is saying, And I think I would probably look at supporting the status quo with 2 from each, and just like point out to the all the members that, yeah, I'm actually will be supporting whatever our hapu and iwi decide. Yeah, so when I vote for that committee, it'll be in the best interest of the RPC and for the Māori committee. So yeah, I probably support the status quo.
Kia ora, Councillor Lambert. Councillor Hokianga.
Kia ora tātou, me ngā tuahuatanga kua puta ake nei, e koe mātua mai, me au nau whakamārama mai kia tātou. I runga I te ngākau whakaiti tēnei au, ka tāpiri atu e nei o nā kōrero. Just to say, actually in the previous discussion in the paper, in the report supplied by our chair of the Māori committee, that I moved the recommendations of those 2 nominations and appointed to the recovery committee. And so based on that and the rationale that you've provided, I'm probably along with Councillor Lambert that I think the status quo is probably somewhere where I'd want to support at the moment.
Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, my first blush reaction was the more inclusive we can be, we should be. I am, as a counterpoint to that, conscious of a number of things. One is that the representation on the committee has doubled from 1 to 2 per committee already, and this would be doubling again, and raises the valid question, well, what about the tai whenua? More broadly, to pick up on Councillor Lambert's point, we all here represent everyone in the region, all our communities were affected. And I think we need to be very balanced and measured, or careful at least, about how we populate our committees on an assumption that as to the effects of Cyclone Gabriel, it affected certain communities worse than others. So it's a delicate balance, but I'm minded to go with, it's not actually status quo, with the doubling of representation of both of those committees that's already there, acknowledging that we have the 2 Māori seats as well, and that we all need to think about all of our communities right across the board. Thank you.
Kia ora, Councillor Williams. Tanya Hopmans.
Thank you. Appreciate the comments. I do want to reflect on mandate though, and the PSGEs have a broad mandate from not only marae, in terms of marae members, but hapu broadly, and they represent those hapu. And the way that, and appreciate too Mike's comments, I'm not here to question or change representation from the Māori committee. I leave that to the Māori committee. Where I'm coming from is that, and where the PSGEs are coming from, is that they are specifically mandated by hapu groupings. And those hapu groupings are quite current, and databases are quite extensive in terms of what they had to do to identify their hapu members to be able to hold that mandate. The 2 Māori seats, with respect to Councillor Lambert and Councillor Hokianga's comments, appreciate that they too are representative, but they are not representative or mandated solely by hapu. They have a broader base that they draw on. So those on the Māori roll who may be tangata whenua or may not be. And we know in Hawke's Bay that there is a large number of Māori living in Hawke's Bay who are not tangata whenua. So I just wanted to emphasise that, because my hope was that we could be inclusive and not, in this case, deny representation from those PSGEs at the table because of the mandate they hold for those hapu who are treaty partners in Hawke's Bay. In total numbers, yes, it would be an increase. You're only looking at actually, I think, an increase of 1 if Peter Eden is appointed confirmed as mana ahuriri because he's already there. So, yeah, I think you will all consider it, but my concern is the message that keeping the status quo or having 2+2 from the Māori Committee and the Regional Planning Committee will not be well received by the PSGs. And there was a special tono also put by Tato by Leon Symes to our chair to take that on board, that this request for, in that case, Tato, which was supported by the tangata whenua members of the RPC, and that's why the 4 have been put forward. So, yeah, I mean, this is your decision, but I just wanted to really be clear about the mandate and trying to be inclusive here at this important committee for the cyclone recovery.
Kia ora, thank you, Tanya. Councillor Van Beek.
Yeah, when I read this paper and when it came to our attention, the first thing went through my mind was whenever I went to a public meeting in the affected areas, I apologised for the first month that I could not be there because I was dealing with my own issues. And so I've let them down. They've been so gracious to forgive me for that, and it was really kind of them. But at the same time, I think Pakawhai, Dartmoor, Esk, Fernhill, Twyford would love to have their own representation on this table as well. They've got me, albeit a little bit broken, and I appreciate your support of all of you around the table and on the screen. So I think I would find it very difficult if it would come to light that we decided to bring additional membership on, and they weren't invited in that as well. That's how they would see it, and they may not see understand the full cultural impact of that and the relationship we have with the tangata whenua, but still it will raise some real questions, and I would have to answer them.
Thank you. Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, like Councillor Williams, my start point is to be as inclusive as possible, but the reality is we've already had one lash at a cyclone recovery committee, and the volume of work is just enormous. And the more, and there's grave risk to the efficient operation, to the successful operation of that committee if we laden it down with too many people, because there's no point in having people at the table without having a voice, and it's just simply a practicality of management. So that's the first point I want to make. The second point I want to make is that this is not, there is no issue here, I believe, of an exclusion of voices, Māori or otherwise, because we need to look at this in the context of all of the other planning and kōrero that is involved in our regional recovery. So we have a regional recovery agency with a whole bunch of duties. We have it reporting to Matariki, which is a very inclusive body. So there are multiple options to engage, and also local communities, including tangata whenua communities, have the ability to file their own action plans into our regional recovery. So there are so many opportunities to feed in. I don't believe there's any risk to any body not being directly represented at this particular table, particularly bearing in mind that we all have regional responsibilities. We bring our regional hats. Thank you.
Kia ora, thank you. Councillor Harding, are there any other questions or comments? Okay, we'll move to recommendations. I'll take them in parts. So we have recommendation 1, 2, 3 and 4, which is self-explanatory. So Councillor Williams, Councillor Sears, you're still okay with that change, those changes?
Yes, thank you.
Yes. Okay, can I have you move Councillor Sears and you second Councillor Williams? 1, 2, 3, 4.
Should we be moving and seconding our own appointments of perhaps someone?
That's It's a very good question.
I'm quite happy to move.
Councillor Hokianga, so 1 and 2.
Thank you, Chair.
All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Then we move on to the further recommendations. So it's either 5
I'd
or
like
6.
to move that we accept recommendation number 5.
And a seconder, Councillor Lambert. Would you like to speak any further? Would you like to speak any further?
No.
No. Okay. All of those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against? Carried. Kia ora. So that leaves that item 16 complete. We will now move on
Can I just
to...
add a comment, Madam
Yes,
Chair?
of course.
Just wanted to welcome Councillor Sears to the Māori Committee on behalf of
Kia
the
ora,
committee.
thank
Look
you.
forward to seeing you at the next committee. Kia ora. And to Martin, thank you for your short stay, Martin.
Thank you for your service.
Really, really I'd love to have seen you stay longer, Martin. I thought you brought a wealth of experience, especially in regards to your whakapapa, to that committee. And it would have been lovely to have seen you stay longer, but as always, next time. Kia ora.
Kia ora. On to item 9, the Hawke's Bay Regional Council Cyclone Gabrielle Response and Recovery Financial Update. Welcome, Susie.
Chris.
And Chris. Thank you, Susie. Could you please introduce us to the item and also any updates you'd like to share with any of the concerned matters? Thank you.
Awesome, thank you. And I'll take this paper as read, but there are a couple of things in here that I do want to highlight to you. Just that the purpose of this is to bring to Council some more regular financial updates around the cyclone response. The attachment that you'll find in the back is our very first draft of trying to bring the macro visual to you going forward, including all recovery cost. And I appreciate at the moment it is slightly messy, and as a first initial view, welcome any feedback you have on that, just so you can fully understand, and we're very transparent about where we believe costs will lie. The other thing I just want to highlight in the paper, there is some quite emotive language in there, and I guess that is systemic and reflective of where the team are at with processing. You can appreciate we have thousands of invoices within the team, and some of the commentary in here just sort of reflects, I think, just the extent of which we're going to make this work for us. And for everyone. I also want to highlight that we've actually, since writing that paper, had some really positive meetings with NEMA. Not that we never have had positive meetings, but they have been very helpful in the way that we are going to process some of our invoices going forward, to speed up the process and to make it easier for both parties to understand by sort of ring fencing certain types of invoices or suppliers into one, rather than just going out with a bulk. Finally, I do just want to highlight the end result. It isn't clear in this paper what's the end result here. What am I trying to tell you? What I am trying to tell you is that there is being a lot of money spent. We are working very hard to claim that back through insurance, through NEMA. And I think ultimately my budgets at the moment are forecasting probably around about a $15 million gap at the end of our response. So when I say response, I'm only talking about our CDM response, our HBRC response to the cyclone, and restoring those impacted assets to what they were.
Thank you, Susie. Thank you. And I'd just like to acknowledge and thank you and your team for the enormous amount of work ever since Cyclone Gabrielle. And it just demonstrates through this paper the various activities that have had to happen on time, best efforts to help those in need. So thank you very much. Thank you, Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Susie, again for the paper and that explanation. And you've actually answered probably my most pressing question, is that I couldn't quite figure out what the shortfall was. There was an article in the Hawke's Bay today this morning suggesting we'd already spent $880 million. And for anyone listening or watching, that is not the case. That is a projected total cost over time. And my understanding from you, Susie, to my first question, we've spent about 45 and there's a possible sort of 15 order of magnitude shortfall at the end of it, right? Yes. The question I've got on helicopter costs and everyone lawyering up around that, as a lawyer and with a at least basic understanding of contract law, I'm finding it very difficult to understand how that's landing on our desk when if I read the paper, it's FENS and NEMA that coordinated flights and instructed these flights. There are claims going through the GECC, which we're obviously dealing with because we've put our hand up to administer some of this stuff. But how do we end up contractually? We didn't commission the work, so to speak. We didn't enter the contract. How are we in the gun financially for services procured by another entity and delivered by a third party? That's the bit I'm missing. Any guidance on that? That buck stopped with
I
us.
think between us we can, contracts are held between helicopter operators and FENS. So they have contracts like a preferred panel, I guess. Let's just refer similar to that. And so in an emergency, FENS will instruct that panel of helicopters or operators to make that work. So there are contracts sitting behind the scenes for that.
Yeah.
The difference here is that we will get an invoice, and it's not a one-page invoice. These are 15 pages of various flights. What the task is that we need to do is obviously reconcile all of those back to approved flights and times, and then understand what was on those flights to enable us to claim it back.
It was just that the line 13, it's an unlucky number, all right. Any shortfall in reimbursement will be a cost to our ratepayers. If NEMA and FENS commission those flights, okay, we might be administrating some of the distribution of funding and putting in claims, but how does that end up falling on our ratepayers? I just really don't.
The ultimate thing is that CDM commission FENS to run all of the air desk and all of the helicopter operations
through that,
using their existing system, which had mainly been set up for fighting forestry, wildfires and stuff like that. So this was the first time it was used in a major response in there. So ultimately, it is CDM and the GECC, which is administered by HBRC, that has actually instructed FENS to operate the helicopters on our behalf.
Right, as our agent, in effect, they've bound us in that way. It just does reveal how clunky this civil defence response model is, with NEMA, GECC, CDEM, Regional Council, to name but a few. Thank you.
Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I just wanted to provide a slightly wider setting to this paper, beyond what you've already done as Chair, and very deservedly thank Susie and her team for the phenomenal work that's gone on behind this to date. The main point I want to make is that this paper is not a surprise to us, as councillors. From very close to day one, we've been asking questions about the financial impacts and the insurance impacts of them, and we've been getting high-quality information from Susie and her team to support this. The detail remains uncertain, and as more issues arise, we work on them. But the other big part of this picture is this is never going to be a situation where we get 100% back. Structurally, we know that we're going to be on the line for 40% at least of some things. So it's 40% of other response costs and 40% of recovery costs, right? So we know, and we also have to bring this into our rate setting, which is coming soon, that it's inescapable. We have significant costs from this. So what we're going through now is due diligence to do the best job we possibly can for our ratepayers, but there's no free lunch in an emergency, unfortunately. Thank you.
Absolutely. Thank you. Councillor Sears.
Thank you. Following on from Councillor Harding, I mean, as he says, you have been keeping us up to date, but the figure keeps getting bigger. We know that, and we knew it was going to be a really big number, which it is. But what I really want to touch on is in those early days, those first few weeks, our people, all our CEDM staff were out in the field and they were having to make decisions, literally sometimes while standing in a river that was climbing. And for them to, without phones or communications, spend, 2 days getting a purchase order number to go and find the bit of paper to bring it to get signed off is absurd. And I really want to acknowledge them because they had to put themselves absolutely on the line and make decisions which in many cases saved lives. So we knew right from the beginning there are things happening that we don't know yet how they'll be paid for. And we said, absolutely, we need to do exactly what needs to be done to protect people. So I just want to acknowledge again you and particularly the CEDM team who were on the ground doing this.
Thank you. Councillor McIntosh.
My point is similar to Councillor Sears, and I'm not the lawyer, but I'll answer the lawyer's question. We were in wartime, and short of having someone with a clipboard standing outside the helicopter asking MSD to tick the box before they allowed that helicopter to go away on an urgent flight is not smart. And I think that the answer to this lies in reasonable goodwill from the parties involved. We were the entity who commissioned the work, if you like, on behalf of others. And in most cases, if you ask a reasonable person to look at those situations, they'd be able to say, well, this party should pay. And that's all we're asking, for a reasonable outcome to a reasonable question.
Okay, Councillor Curtin.
Madam Chair, are you in a position to need a mover for the paper?
If there are no other questions,
Well, happy to
looks
move.
like you.
Just one.
Yes.
So apologies, I was out of the room, just into number 3. Each year Hawke's Bay Regional Council receives 2.9 million. I note that we're at a deficit. I just want a bit of an understanding around as to how that came about.
I think in terms of the civil defence rate, the emergency management rate that we've targeted rate that we've levied over the last few years, in the last LTP, we changed some things around how overheads were allocated, and they gave a higher proportion of overheads across to CEDM. There have been conversations at the governing body of CEDM about their budget going forward, and that was one of the things that was going to start to be brought up about that. So the overhead has been developed, the reserve deficit has been created through some decisions that were made in the LTP of not increasing the emergency management targeted rate, but then taking a fair share of the overheads of the organisation as a whole. And that was already going to be part of a discussion to address and will be looked at in more detail now as part of the next LTP.
Thank you.
Thank you. There are no other comments? Yep. Councillor Foley.
Thanks, Chair. Look, just a big thanks and well done to the finance team. If just one helicopter invoice, 15 pages. Hate to think what the pile of them looks like, and it's not business as usual. So, you guys have obviously been under the pump for a long time now, and it'll continue for some time. So thank you for that. Just to sum up kind of those questions and conversation, I see sort of two sides to it. One, there was just the chaos happening and decisions had to be made, and I think we all accept that. But then is there another side to that this could be done better next time? I'm thinking of review and stuff, and so you don't have to be definitive, but is there sort of a bit of both in there when you look back?
Question.
I think absolutely. We've already started conversations, specifically around the logistics finance element of the response about what are things that we learned, what things could we have in place straight away for a size. The size and scale of everything just was more than anyone was expecting, but it has been really good in giving us some learnings and making it basic. You talk about raising purchase orders and stuff. It took us a couple of days, but we got some handwritten purchase orders, just some templates we did up that were being used, and we're providing a really quick way to get a purchase order done and all the information we needed to then take back to people in the office to put into the tech one so we could pay things. Just having that set up from day one next time will make a big change. And, in all honesty, actually bits of paper with handwritten notes on them was the best way, and it's giving us heaps of information to be able to try and claim back as much of these costs as possible from the people who should pay for them.
I think we've got a keen mover, Councillor Curtin. Can I have a seconder? Councillor Harding. Thank you, Councillor Curtin.
Well, thanks, Madam Chair, and there are probably three bits of commentary I'd like to make at this point. The first is the apology that came from Ms Young on this paper. No need to apologise at all. My view is that what's represented in the paper is a very succinct overview of what happened financially and the exposure that the council faces, and we've now got a spreadsheet which ratepayers, and the day is coming when we're going to have to put our hands in their pocket, will have a very, very clear picture of what went on. And I think the paper's done this council a huge favour in that regard by providing the precision that's gone on. And going back to those days on day 5, 6, 7, etc., when the bills started to mount, it's akin to that pile of trash, and Councillor Van Beek will know this. It's like that big pile of orchard waste all bound up, and trying to pull all these invoices are sort of gathered together like that. So what I see this paper doing is reflecting an enormous amount of work from the finance team in unravelling that. The other element too is that we've got, as councillors have said, is decision makers on the ground from CEDM, from all of our staff out there, and from the regional council staff itself. Is a tremendous will to get out there and do things and make things happen and keep the community safe. I don't want them for one moment to back off making decisions that they made on the day. The fog of war is like that, and sure, we could possibly do things better, but please do not deny a rest home a generator, or deny a pharmacy the opportunity to open their doors to the public. We want that decision-making to take place. I think one of the lessons that we've learnt out of this whole experience is the need to empower people on the ground to make decisions. That's what saved many, many lives in this region, with individuals stepping up, making that individual decision to rescue someone. So we certainly don't want to be taking that opportunity away. The other point I'd make is the overall commitment of, and the number of hours allocated here by staff from HBRC. We can see here at a glance what the commitment of the organisation was across the board. Huge amounts of energy and effort going in, and all I can say is well done, team. You've done the region proud, and in some ways what you've done in producing this paper is to articulate that for us. We are going to have to go back to the public and say, as Councillor Williams pointed out at paragraph 13, there will be a deficit. The public understand that this community has to stand up and meet that cost. Sure, we can strong arm as much as we can at a national level to get the resources we need, but we are facing this $885 million issue to build back better over the coming years. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Harding.
Kia ora, Chair. Look, I'd simply just want to acknowledge that besides Susie and her team, the regional council sector as a whole has also, stepped in, as some of our providers have, and provided capacity and the expertise to help us on this journey. So this is not us standing by ourselves trying to figure out, how to deal with a disaster. We've had a lot of help, and we are happy to acknowledge that.
Thank you. Any other speakers? There are none. All those who agree to receive the report, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Thank you. It is time for, do we have morning tea? No, we can skip that. We will move on to item number 10, report from the Transport committee. Councillor Williams, would you like to briefly introduce this report?
No, I'd like to do it in a long and protracted way.
Sorry, that wasn't on the table.
No, I didn't think it was. I'll attempt to be brief. There's a couple of dimensions I really wanted to touch on. Firstly is the focus that was had prior to the meeting minutes that are recorded there on really building back better for the future and resilience, and what that looks like in a regional context, because I know there's a lot of immediate decisions being made to repair infrastructure, including railway lines and bridges and roads, using insurance funding, or our stock banks is just going hard out to get them back to what they were, but they don't preclude future decisions to place the region in a more resilient place for future events. And so we actually spent quite a lot of attention and time and attention developing a definition of resilience that will inform the primary loading factor, the primary criteria or weighting for all future transport investment decisions in this region. In other words, we're going to evaluate all potential candidate projects in our next bid for funding from government relative to a very high weighting on resilience, and we spent considerable time developing a regional definition of what resilience looks like. And one of those at points one of the paper was a new KPI that there is a functioning road network. Well, what that is part of a big picture of what resilience looks like. But we realise that at the end of the day, whatever happens, you cannot have a situation where, for example, Napier, there is no road or rail connection in or out of it whatsoever. It has no cell phone coverage and it has no electricity. That is the exact opposite of resilience. Wairoa experienced it and until very recently. So we need to do better in ensuring that at any one time and for all time and at all times, there is at least a transport connection that operates or a plan to get people from A to B as they need to during those situations. And we're very much focused on that for the longer term recovery planning and our funding bids to government for next year. So I just wanted to really, really highlight that point. There is, in the midst of that, a discussion about the My Way bus service trial that I just wanted to touch on here. Public transport in New Zealand, and in Hawke's Bay is no exception, is an extremely challenging context, an extremely challenging situation, not helped in the least by the New Zealand-wide chronic shortage of bus drivers, which in turn is a result of that not being an attractive employment option for a lot of people due to wages and conditions. Now, we can only deal with half of that picture. The government tips in suggestions for new minimum wages or livable wages for drivers, but we, by structural design, need to immediately come up with the other half to match it, or it doesn't happen. And yet here we are, a ratepayer-stretched organisation, ratepayers screaming at us, don't put the rates up. We've just been slammed by a supermodel event that we're trying to recover from. And in the midst of all of that, public transport has, you know, I guess been one of the casualties. I just want to note that the team is working extremely hard. And when I say team, that team is challenged in terms of its capacity, and that's one of the people and capability risks that have emerged from this whole thing. And so we are trying to do our very best to get public transport up and running, but one of our key routes that connected people from Napier and through to the hospital and back, there's a bridge that's not there anymore. The expressway service through you know, the express service Napier to Hastings going on the expressway, it's too congested to operate and put on an expressway service and claim it to be such. So in the midst of all of that, if I can give you the context, you have this My Way situation where huge success in terms of patronage, enormous burden on this organisation in terms of operating it. And the reality is that the government has required us, or Kotahi has required us, to index our costs in a way that we're having to pay more than had been modelled. And My Way Napier is in turn the casualty of that. So realistically, My Way Napier, which should have been trialled in this year, is either not going to happen at all, or at the very best, if we can keep Waka Kotahi in line and enamoured with the project, would be deferred into next year. And I'm incredibly sad about that. But there's so much other people are sad about that's way worse, I'm afraid. And that's the context, again, that I wanted to share around. The point 6.2, it isn't expressed in the way it should be. The point is that if Hastings My Way is viewed as successful, that's something that might continue into the future. It's going to have a second year of life in Hastings, but My Way is not happening in Napier this year, and unless some funding emerges, it won't be happening in Napier next year either. So, yeah, that's the point I wanted to raise. It was great to have KiwiRail at our first meeting in 3.5 years that I've been in chair actually turn up. And we're very embracing of them. It is essential that our recovery focus be multimodal, and that's part of our definition and discussion, and a view shared by all of the mayors across the TAs in this region. So thank you, Chair. Those are my comments.
Thank you, Councillor William, for your very brief update.
As always.
Councillor McIntosh.
Thanks, Chair. Look, I just wanted, also under the KiwiRail umbrella, good on them for getting up to speed quickly, but I've noted within that subject of bridges, and they're not really our direct jurisdiction. However, from what I can see at Awatoto, the bridge that has been replaced there is exactly the same as the bridge that was there previously. And the bridge that was there previously acted as a big roadblock, enormously damaging to the Awatoto area, attacking the flood banks either side, and the same is true of a number of our bridges on the main waterways. And if we're going to do a good job of this recovery, and if we stick bridges back as they were, then we haven't done a good job. There's an argument to say that we would have been much, much, much better off if we had better bridge design on our rivers. And so I just want to make the point and ensure that that point is not lost as part of our recovery, that if we are to build back better, then bridges is actually a much more important component of that than we think.
Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. Councillor Rodley.
Do you want to hold up? Oh no, sorry, I was just watching Chris hopping up and down there.
Oh,
Just get a comment on the bridge situation.
would you like to comment on the bridge? Yes.
Can you bridge that gap for us, please, Chris?
Oh, I get it.
Thank you, Councillor. I think you've highlighted a very key point. I just want everyone here to know that it has been recognised in the infrastructure PO of the Recovery Agency, where Waka Kotahi, Hastings District Council and ourselves, and we have raised this issue also with the KiwiRail Bridge. And so, particularly with Hastings District Council, there's an understanding that any flood control and transport routes need to be designed together. And so that's a conversation that has just started, but the main players are in the room in terms of that infrastructure pose, so it won't get forgotten.
Can I just ask, Madam Chair, in terms of the railway bridge at Awatoto, it looks like being replaced like for like. Can you say whether that's a temporary arrangement or whether KiwiRail have in fact got a plan to do better?
So my understanding is it's a temporary build to get them up and running, and then they'll look at their longer term plan beyond that.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Rodley.
Yes, through you, Chair. Fantastic that the functioning roading network as a KPI has been identified as being quite important. I concur with that. Could you just quickly speak to why it has been, the resilience of that network's been given a 60% rating?
Well,
seems quite low.
There are other factors, including safety and efficiency. So it's not all about resilience. Road corridors, State Highway 5, for example, need to operate up to a certain level of service so that there are efficient travel times between Hawke's Bay and the rest of the economy to the north of us. And safety is equally a huge driver of all of the decision-making we do. So it got elevated, should we put it that way, from sort of 45% to 65%, and safety and efficiency came down, if I recall. That was the ILM mapping. Yeah, so it is a balance, but it's not the full picture.
Thank you. Any other questions? Councillor Lambert.
Just one, sorry, Martin, about the bridges, the railway bridges in particular. Up in our way, we had different issues, and that actually, the railway bridges survived really well. And one of the things that was evident is, why aren't they using those as an alternative road transport? And I take it that there are different standards for both, but it does seem that if they can support a weight, surely we could put another standard in there that makes it more flexible to be used.
Is that something you can answer, Councillor Williams?
I'm not sure that I can. I do recall my father talking about driving over the viaduct in 1938, looking perilously out the window at the void beneath. So I'm sure that there were safety considerations, and I have heard it said that they simply couldn't meet modern safety expectations.
Although boys in the utes were driving over them all the time.
Only boys?
Yeah, old boys.
Thank you, Councillor. Would you like to move we receive that report?
I would say move. Thank you, Chair.
Madam Chair,
And you would like to make a comment?
I would,
Yes,
if you've dealt with it.
Mr. Bayfield.
In here is experience from Asata that I discussed with you earlier. Would it be, notwithstanding the work of the Regional Land Transport Committee, but given the discussion raised, is it appropriate that the council write to Kiwi Rail and to Waka Kotahi raising this issue of ensuring that capacity is considered in the expansion of any rebuilt bridges? And the hope that our staff might work closely with them to ensure that that is planned for, so that otherwise you could find that a temporary bridge that is built might still be there in 50 years' time.
Becomes permanent.
If that's a question to me, my answer is not only is that a good idea, but where do I sign? Where does Claire O'Keefe sign? And it needs to be, they need to be fully engaged and involved in our processes, because they've got their own line to the National Land Transport Fund, and we need to actually connect before we get to that point.
Madam Chair, if the council so saw it to instruct me to draft a letter for Martin's signature, Councillor Williams' signature, I'd be happy to do so.
Thank you.
Absolutely. We'll add that to the recommendations.
Thank you very much.
Can I have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor McIntosh. Thank you very much. All those who agree, say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora. The report from the Regional Planning Committee 2 weeks ago, almost. I think Tanya's popped off. But there were no decisions made that committee meeting. But the agenda items really spoke to an update on where our planning and policies teams are, given the light of our the recovery planning that is underway at the moment. The decision item that was around freshwater management units was deferred in a subsequent meeting between myself, Tanya Hopmans, Mr. Bayfield and Katrina Brunton and staff. Was that we work through a program around people at place, which was scheduled in the Kotahi plan. So I've been able to undergo that work to help us determine the FMU boundaries. So that is a piece of work to follow. But other than that, there is not a lot to report from that meeting. Would you like to add any more? Katrina was not there yet. No, you were on holiday during that RPC meeting. Oh, you were here. Would you like to add any more?
Right, yeah, I think you've articulated it well. Ultimately, in terms of the working on at place portion of work that we need to do, it's about working with our tangata whenua, our PSGs, our tai whenua, establishing the vision and values work and how that informs Te Mana o Te Wai statements. Essentially, that's where we're at.
Any other questions? Councillor Williams.
I don't have a question, Chair, but I do have a comment and observation that I want to bring, so just whenever the appropriate time is for that.
Sure, now.
Okay, well, look, and
Can I
it's,
just clarify, because I think there's one further sentence, and that will lead to the definition of FMUs.
Correct. Yeah, it's not to set the FMUs. Absolutely correct.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
yeah, look, thank you. I recall at this meeting there was a discussion about the government proposal to trial spatial planning across the country. And we've got this conundrum at the moment where, not least because of Cyclone Gabriel, we're finding the 31 December 2024 deadline for our new Kotahi plan becoming increasingly unachievable. And even if we were to pare it back to water planning, challenging again because of, in part, where mana whenua are at in terms of capacity, as well as this organisation and start. So I just wanted to make sure people understood, and I don't think I explained it very well, why I think we need to stay in the conversation with government as discussed at that meeting on spatial planning. The point is that a spatial plan is really an exercise in determining constraints and opportunities, that is, areas that are at risk or that are of significance, whether it be soils or cultural significance or landscape or whatever it might be. But equally those places that we need to really actively, positively enable people to live and do business in, so that we've still got a functioning, vibrant economy at the end of the day. And then thinking about all of the transport connections. So if you're living here and you're working there, how do you get in between in a climate resilient way? And those are, the beauty of a spatial plan is that it connects through to the infrastructure decisions. It connects through the Land Transport Management Act, through the Local Government Act, etc. And it really logically is something that should precede the Kotahi plan, which would then wrap environmental protection around those quite deep structural discussions. And so I'm very keen that we don't lose sight of spatial planning, and that is the reason why. And I guess just to finish with this, whatever's announced tomorrow around managed retreat decisions and 1s, 2s and 3s, that's not the end of the job. That is quite literally the first step on the road. We need to continue to be making decisions that keep our communities safe. And that is something that I think spatial planning, building off the recovery plan that Sophie's committee and Louise are working on, takes us into a future where we're safe not just from floods, but from tsunami and from sea level rise. And yet we've got somewhere to live, we've got somewhere to work, and we can get in between. And so that's why I don't think we should lose sight of spatial planning. I'd put it before in priorities Kotahi, which is the focus of that committee at the moment, in logical and ideal world terms. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Williams. 100% supportive, and I might get Katrina to just outline all of those placemats, we call them.
Yeah.
Making sure that regional spatial planning is in there.
Is it still live?
Yeah. I'll try and do this very quickly. Ultimately, Kotahi was always about a kuta ki tai approach. It was always about so how the land use was impacting on, so mountain to sea approach very quickly. So it was never going to be just environmental impact. It was about outcomes and taking into account the regional land transport plan. In ordinary peace times, that would have led us to generally a regional planning framework that would have filtered down into district plans. We are not in those times anymore. There is currently ongoing the future development strategy work with all the councils, of which you are now on that committee, Councillor Williams. And so that work is ongoing. That work is setting up or taking the work that we have already done fortunately, in the Regional Land Transport Plan and how we envisage our transport futures looking, how we envisage our future development land being developed. And then adding to that how land use is going to change, what impacts it has on water quantity and quality that comes through the resilience plans and recovery plans that Louise is doing. That all needs to come together, you're correct, into a spatial strategy as the most appropriate landing place. I was instructed by RPC to continue those conversations with central government on regional spatial strategies. What did first tranche look like? There is no decisions on that, but I have had conversations with the ministry. We have asked for an extension on our requirements under the NPSFM. I have it on good account that we are likely to receive an extension through an OIC. We'll continue to work with ministry officials on that. And in addition, where are we in terms of first tranche? Still having those conversations, but because we are in a difficult position, both us and Tairawhiti, the question that central government will be having is whether or not, as a region, we are the best example of a first tranche, because ultimately the first tranche regions were about rolling out new legislation and what learnings that could have for other regions. And so I have also been in discussions with ministry officials about what special legislation might look like for us and Tairawhiti together in terms of recovery and spatial planning.
Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you, Katrina. Any further questions or comments? Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive this? I'm happy to move. Second, Councillor Sears. All those who agree say aye. Aye. Those against, carried. Thank you. On to strategic projects report, 30th of April. We'll take this as read. Do we have any questions for our project leads? Councillor Lambert.
Yes, I do. There's one in here about Wairoa and about projects ongoing with the streams.
Where are we looking, Councillor Lambert? What number?
We're on this one? I did it the wrong item. So I'm talking about significant organisation activities.
Yeah, strategic projects. So that's item 12.
Sorry, I'm on.
Oh, you jumped ahead.
Well ahead of us.
Yeah, parachute course.
Any questions from item 12? Councillor Foley.
Thanks, Chair. Just a question for Chris. Couldn't let you get away with that one. Last time we talked about the IRG project and the deadline looming, but obviously had multiple hold-ups, not least the weather. Have we still not been able to successfully get an extension?
Yeah, so I'm actually in Wellington tomorrow with John Kingsford to talk to the Oversight Committee about the impact of the weather on our program. We'll be recommending that we extend that program out, and we'll also be talking to them about other options of which particular projects we do. So that's all lined up for tomorrow, and then I can report back once we've had that meeting.
Subsequent? Yes. Any chance to ask for more money while you're down there?
We will certainly highlight the need for funding to help rebuild Hawke's Bay, yes.
Thank you.
I meant for gravel, but...
That answer is actually very clever.
Any other questions? There are none. Thank you. I'm happy to move to receive. Councillor Foley, second. All those agree say aye. Aye. Those against. Moving on to item 13, significant organisational activities. Councillor Lambert. What number are we looking at?
And who am I talking to? Item 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Oh, Kapai. All of Wairoa.
And because there's obviously plans away to remove debris and stuff. And I've had a request by one of our ratepayers about a stream down in Ropunga that actually is for the water supply. And during the storm, there was logs right backed up on a bridge that crosses the stream. But, so some of that was removed, or most of it was pulled out. There's still work to be repairing the bridge on it, but the fact is there's a lot more debris upstream that's going to come down again eventually. Is there any chance of having something done with that?
Chris?
Yeah, so we'll take that on board. Obviously, we have our task force up in Wailoa next week, talking to key people about what some of the jobs are, and Ed Maxwell is also working on additional funding for timber dams and things in the catchments. So there's a mechanism, so we'll take that on board and progress it.
Yeah, it was reported during the CDM thing, so it'll be on there somewhere in the
So we'll just,
location we'll put out there.
So we'll just follow it up.
Yeah, Mr. Bayfield?
Or else trees will be knocking your door down.
I wish to state my bias and recognise the good people of Rauponga. That is one of the most phenomenal drinking water supply systems in New Zealand, delivered by locals, and what they do in terms of clearing that difficult stream in order to keep that water flowing is quite incredible.
Yeah, I've got a photo of our guys in the water.
Yeah,
dragging them
exactly. They're just amazing. And they've delivered drinking water quality for the best part of a decade with difficult circumstances where so many places and other places in New Zealand just tell people to boil water.
Mr. Paku?
The Hastings Karamu scheme review. Because thank you, Chris. The local mana whenua ran a wānanga Saturday week past, and it was in regards to the Karamu. I think it might be a good opportunity to connect that group with whoever's undertaking the actual review and just take their feedback. It might save us some time. The other point I wish to make here is during the cyclone itself, we had a large volume of water that was being held up back at Kahuranaki, Pukeho, and heading south. Now, that water had made its way into the catchment and into the waterways. I think we mostly would have had a totally different outcome for that Karamu stroke Tuki area. I'm mindful that it was an old flood area to start with. There has been localised draining, but it keeps the water, if you like, within that confined catchment. My worry is now that we're seeing that flooding take place for longer periods of the year, extending into the summer, which we very rarely saw. I'm afraid that we, by coincidence or by circumstances, that we may drive the landowners to seek to actually drain that particular body or catchment into our waterways through a commercial need to actually be able to utilise their land on a more effective basis. If the land's underneath water for 4 or 5 months of the year, the natural inclination is I need to do something. So either we need to get there early and support, if you like, the continued retention of floodwater. So that means we need to recognise and perhaps compensate that type of thinking, especially if we're talking about holding water back. So it's happening now. We don't have to create this, it's already happening. But if we don't recognise it, whether it be through their rates or something, and their land is staying underwater for longer and longer, I think, the natural progression is to actually drain it back to the established waterways. That's the only commercial outcome I can see, other than growing rice. Okay.
So I'll take that as a comment, and we can feed that back to the team.
Thank you, Chris. Councillor Curtin?
Yes, thanks, Madam Chair. Chris, I just want to talk about gravel. No, I don't.
Already asked them.
Just taking to item 11, you've got the Napier City Council engagement or re-engagement and the business case. Can you give us a date for the finalisation of that particular business case?
So in short, no, I cannot at this point in time. So Napier City Council are re-engaging with Morrison Lowe. and they need to commence that process. And the first part of that process is to rebrief both of the councils, and then so it'll probably be quite a few months away.
Going to 15 and 16 Napier Miani scheme review. So we've got a completed review delivered by Stantec, being reviewed and accepted. When can we expect to see that review tabled?
So we need to schedule a workshop. First, we had one scheduled and was delayed through the cyclone, so we just need to schedule that in at the earliest opportunity in the next sort of month or so, depending on what else there is in the in line for workshops. So we're ready to bring it to you when we have a slot.
Thank you. Councillor Harding.
Sure, Chair. Look, I want to just touch briefly on Cyclone Gabriel response and gravel extraction. So, paragraph 20, you'd be hard placed to find a more understated statement of activity that's been taking place, and I just want to commend once again Chris and his team for that rapid rebuild. Nothing short of outstanding, and also commend him on his bravery for going into print in a public way with the expectation that all of the breaches in the Ngāraroa and the Tutaikuri are likely to be completed by mid-June. That's amazing, outstanding news. The inference, obviously, and there's some detail in there, is that the the Tuki and the Waipawa are following in behind. I think from recollection, we're talking probably July for most, if not all, of that work, I think is what we're working to at the moment. So it'd be good to get a little clarification on that. And then just so that Councillor Foley doesn't feel like he's alone in the discussion around gravel and Waipawa in particular, I just note that the point 14 talks about allocation for the coming financial year being finalised in May, of which we are the last day in May. And my question is specifically around, I believe it's GNS Science and the latest work that they are doing around the aerial imaging. Sorry, I've just forgotten the term temporarily.
With the LiDAR.
The LiDAR, and just whether that's some data that might be able to be brought to play quickly. Thank you.
So to respond on that, yes, so Waipawa, the reason we're not saying we're finishing the Upper Tuki scheme is there are a couple of sites where we don't believe putting back what was there is the right thing to do because of probably our view around the resilience of the way those stop banks have been placed. And there's a couple of locations where we're doing that. In terms of the key areas around the populated areas, they are already completed. The Walker Road is being topsoiled at the moment, and that's probably a week's worth of work because it's quite a considerable stop bank. So the key areas in that area are finished, and we now have actually 5 pods down there now working on those other areas. So that's proceeding, albeit a little bit behind the Heratona. And on to gravel, in terms of the Upper Tuki scheme, we've had a surveyor up there in March, and the surveyor's down there again today, particularly, actually tomorrow, to survey around Waipawa Township. One of the best ways, I think, to answer questions around gravel is to have some of the facts, and survey after the cyclone is a key component of bringing that fact base to the community, and so we'll finish that work and then respond as appropriate. In terms of the allocation, we have been through an allocation process with industry, and industry have been given allocations for the next year, and we also know we continue to have significant volumes of gravel in the Upper Tuki scheme. We know we've got our IRG, essentially a subsidy for the transport costs, and we know that Central Hawke's Bay District Council, I think, have a $150 million road program. So there are opportunities there if we can connect everyone up, and I think that's what we need to collectively pursue.
Can I just say, Councillor McIntosh, myself, and Councillor Foley visited that site. I think it's Walker Road, if I got it right, but the top of the Awanui there, sorry, the top of the Papanui, and a really impressive piece of work. Enormous engineering effort are really high, truly commendable. Thank you.
Thank you. Since we're on gravel, I'll hand it over to Councillor Foley.
Thanks, Chair. Just a couple of questions, gravel and cycleways. Allocations for sustainable gravel extraction, is that relevant to Apatoki, that comment? And if so, what does it mean?
Yep, so it's relevant to all of our schemes. So under our consent, we are limited to the sustainable removal of gravel, which is all around the grade line for the river, not going below grade. That's all written into our consent. So that's what we mean by the term sustainable. So we're effectively not mining shingle in a particular area.
Okay, bigger conversation for another day.
Every day in your case.
Cycle network,
Gravel.
particularly the ones on stop banks. I got asked a question the other day and didn't actually know, so I'll ask the such as the one down around Waipakaro, which I'm obviously aware of and been on numerous times, the lime tracks on the top. Yep. So you're removing vegetation. Is that compromising the stop bank at all?
So I don't believe so. It's something we need to look carefully at. The stop banks that I've seen, that surface has held up remarkably well, but there'll probably be examples where it hasn't. So I think that's something we'll look at carefully. At the moment, it wouldn't be a significant concern of mine, but happy to see examples of where perhaps it hasn't performed well. But certainly there's tens of kilometre sections of stop banks that I've seen that have been overtopped with only minor damage to that surface.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Van Dyke.
There's another question here. Anyway, I won't talk about burning because I've just been labelled by interim chief executive. 42 to 46 and linking up to 50 and 51, and it's about erosion control. And it's good to hear that maybe Ian or you can answer that one, but it's we're going to establish an additional nursery, is that right?
Through you, Chair. Yes, Councillor, that's absolutely the case. We're just working through options for that, but the initial thinking is to expand nursery production by at least 3 times and probably place nurseries north and south in the region and look to supply this region's needs as well as some of the broader North Island pole requirements. And
when do you think we actually will see the results of those nurseries starting up this coming winter? Because I know you've already been into looking at land that we have in our own possession that we can plant up. Yeah, certainly have south. In fact, the team are down there today, or they might have been there yesterday, just looking at our Waipakaro site, what the options might be. Look, in terms of process, unfortunately, these things take a number of years to stand up because you have to, like an orchard, establish them, get the stalls in the ground, grow them to the point where they're producing suitable quality poles. So what we would like to be in the position of this at the end of this winter is sites funding and work commencing during the summer months, ready for stall planting next winter, and then pole harvesting 2 to 3 years after that. And in light of the cyclone that we've just encountered and the results of what worked and what didn't work, is there some thinking of that maybe varietal choices may have to change? So we have, it's actually one of the science lines of inquiry is to look at performance of our various planting regimes across the region to understand what works and what doesn't. It will probably invariably look at species. We don't have a huge variety of species in production in New Zealand at the moment, but what we do have is species that are really well adapted for our regional climate for establishment. So as in they will survive our typically dry climate rather than the atypically wet one that we've had.
And so what we're interested in is trees that will establish and survive, and then how they perform in terms of holding soil together during these wet periods. So that's the work that the team are doing at the moment, is to look at, well, which areas under tree cover performed, why, what species, et cetera, et cetera.
No, that's really good, fantastic. And then I come back to burning. We've actually, NEWAG's actually brought a trailer in to measure air quality. I think it's very important that we actually will talk about that in our communication. That good practice will actually be monitored, because I believe it won't be an issue. It actually will be actually an aid for us to actually do what is right for the community.
Yep. Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Roadley.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Possibly to you again, Ian, sorry for sitting down, but maybe it's just a given that item 56, or point 56, around our science needs and sources of potential funding, that there's some capacity built into our soil understanding and our soil science. I kind of see that as a little gap that we maybe is or isn't there.
We've actually, through your chair, we've actually just recently recruited a second soil scientist. So we're back up to our original soil science capacity within the science team. We probably won't go beyond that at this point, and what we are heavily connected into is the likes of Manaaki Whenua Landcare Trust, Landcare Research, and their science capabilities. So we've got sufficient to manage the programs of work that we would typically have in operation, and what we're doing is pulling in that additional recovery funding that NB has into the CRIs and universities, and bringing that science into the region because we have that capability in-house. So we're sort of leveraging it, if you like.
I don't think we can undersell the importance of that knowledge about our soils and how it affects everything that we do.
Yeah, I agree.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Williams.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Look, and I missed a trick on the previous paper, but this is a conduit into it. The point made and highlighted by Councillor Harding about the pace of rebuild. If I go back to page 45 of the agenda, just one thing I just wanted to land on is the point that we may be running into funding deadlines from our previously programmed IRG funded work to keep our Hiratonga Flood Protection Scheme as a whole, or get that up to 1 in 500. And yet it was that 1 in 500 that really avoided such a greater catastrophe than the disaster we had. Is 1 in 500 at risk? Are we hitting a funding deadline? Are we going to be able to complete that IRG program of work? What's the story there?
Yeah, so the IRG funding covered priority areas. It didn't cover the entire program, and in fact it's quite a lengthy program for the entire scheme to be raised to that standard.
Oh, yeah.
So we want to take a pause. It's really a strategy of no regrets. So where we can make upgrades that would likely be consistent with the long term, we will continue with those. But as we've previously discussed, we want to look at our scheme so we understand very clearly how it would perform in an over-design event. And so that might mean that we shift our strategy going forward with precisely what upgrades we make where, and that's about potentially detention, secondary flow paths, or land use in certain areas, or variable levels of protection. So we need to do all that work, just highlighting we're opening it right up for all of the options, because we want to understand next time there's an over-design event that we actually know how the scheme will respond, because it's just the rain fell in a certain place, the scheme responded in a certain way.
I think you understand that. I guess my question is are we about to lose funding for that project? And if so, how much do you think is at risk? I guess is the question I've got.
Yep. We're having our meeting tomorrow.
Yeah.
So ultimately, the decision of the panel But we're putting forward a very proactive case that that money is desperately required.
Yeah.
We can actually put it to good use.
Right.
And we will continue with the gravel extraction. We can expand on the gravel extraction subsidy as an example if we free up money from another project.
Right.
And we have delivered substantially on the projects already. So we've delivered in Wairoa, we've delivered in the Upper Tuki from an infrastructure, we've delivered a good project here. We've got 2 designed, ready to go in consenting. So we can demonstrate action and movement forward.
That's great. Thanks, Chris. It would just be tragic if funding for that type of work was to go south because of.
Stay south.
Any other questions? Councillor Harding.
Thank you, Chair. Look, just a question on what may or may not be in post-cyclone science. Probably Ian can answer this one. And it's just a question of, particularly for intensive horticulture, growing systems, sort of flood-resilient growing systems in areas where we might recognise more clearly in future that we may have above design events. So I just want to know whether there's any, where are we as an organisation of any work that is being discussed or underway that may result in guidance or, thought going back into the horticultural sector about how their build back better can be built back better.
It's a good question, Councillor, and off the top of my head, I'm not aware of any particular programs that are being developed, but immediately I go to the role of the Future Farming Trust and or Landwise, and that's a really nice lane for them to occupy. We are extensively engaging with Landwise in technical advice for growers to whether you're pastoral or horticultural systems to grow through this, farm through this. So it's probably a natural extension to look at alternative systems, species, etc., that are perhaps more flood tolerant. So look, take that comment on board and I'll feed it back into the team for further discussion.
Yeah, and just for the sake of clarity, sometimes it may be just a different way of, whether it's a row orientation or a buried irrigation, that sort of thing. It's not necessary. Wouldn't want people to feel the implication that we're talking about a change in growing systems or a loss of, productive capacity. It's just about doing things smarter. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Roadley.
Thank you for your indulgence, Chair. I just wanted to comment both this item and the number 12, the presentation and the work that goes into that makes it really simple for myself to read, and I really appreciate the way it's laid out. Thank you.
Thank you.
Very good.
Support that that acknowledgement. Thank you, team.
Thank you.
Can I have a mover and a seconder to receive this item? Councillor McIntosh, Councillor Harding. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Well done, team. We will move into public excluded. Happy to move. Councillor Foley second. All those who agree say aye.
Aye.
Those against, carried. Kia ora.